everyone, welcome to the Art Workshop. My name is Christopher Epling on behalf of Pike TV. We're so happy you tuned in today. We've got a great show in store for you, and I'm just so thankful to be able to bring this show to you along with the other team here at Pike TV. It's just something that we really just have so much fun doing. So we hope you participate and follow along at home, because that's what the show's about, getting you to be involved and learning a little bit about drawing and seeing, you may surprise yourself. In today's show, I thought about doing something similar to what we've been working on in the past, but a little different. My favorite medium is ink. And at the time of this recording, springtime is coming in. The flowers are blooming. The trees are all budding out. It's a wonderful time of year, but it doesn't last too long before the heat of summer comes. But if you're like me, though, you start to notice how nature is changing around you. These small changes gradually over time that just completely changes the environment 100% fold from winter going into spring then summer. So I thought we'd do a little something dealing with nature today, but I want to talk about technique. So with pen and ink drawings, there's so many different ways you can go about getting different effects for your art, different effects for whatever it is we might be trying to draw. And I would love for you at home to go ahead and get ready. Now, you don't need any special equipment for this. You just really need paper, a pencil and an eraser, and a pen. Now, there's various types of pens. We'll go over a couple of them today, but you don't really need anything special. Ballpoint pen, hey, that's perfect. It really doesn't matter. The main point, though, is that you try and just see what happens. Now, for me, I've brought in a few examples for the show in terms of pens. There's different types, like I said, and sometimes folks will get kind of lost in that. They'll think, well, I don't really know which pen is best for what I'm trying to do. But it really depends on what you're trying to draw. Now, these are just an assortment of various types of pens that I've brought in. Now, I want to show you the differences between some of these before we get started. The first one here is a brush pen, and that means, obviously it's a brush. Now, with most pens, what you'll find is that the tips on brushes, they're either sable or they're synthetic. Now, if they're real hair, sable hair, they cost a little more. The synthetics are a little bit more affordable, but they do eventually, the ink will burden down in there and you'll have to clean it, or sometimes if you don't clean it, it will corrode. But inside of this pen, you have a reservoir of ink. So this reservoir sits back in here, this little tiny cap, and what you do is you just keep plugging those in, and you can have a pen that will last a lifetime if you take good care of it, which I encourage everyone to do. So brush pens. Now, you can also get a brush pen that is not refillable, such as this one. So this is a Micron brush pen. This is not refillable, like I said. It's going to eventually run out of ink. You got to throw it away. So you really have two options when it comes to brush pens. You can buy one that you toss out altogether, or you can buy one that you have to purchase the refills for, but it will last a little bit longer. Now, there's also pens such as this one. Now, this one is a felt tip. It's a little thick. The tip is a little wide. You get nice broad lines with this one. You also have another example of a felt tip here. Now, both of these are different brands of pens. It really doesn't matter which one you choose, but when you think of felt tip, think of a Sharpie. Sharpies are a great example when it comes to the good old felt tips. Now, this pen here is another brush pen. I want to show you the difference in these, though. This one is an actual sable hair, so the lines are going to be a little bit different, a little bit smoother, actually. The brush does make a difference between synthetic hair and real hair when it comes to brush pens. Then the last pen I brought in as an example. Now, this looks like a fountain pen, but this is actually a Pilot Falcon. Now, if you're a pen nerd like me, you know kind of what this is. These can be a little costly, but they're worth it. The tip looks like a nib. So you remember the quill and ink? You have the quill pens like the feather, the turkey feather. You dip it in, you write, you dip it in, you write. This works similar to that, except you don't have to dip all the time. You can actually have another reservoir that's built in the back, just like the brush pen example. And you just have to keep refilling that, but you got to keep it clean. A little bit of soap and water will do that for you. But the lines you get with this are very thin, which is perfect for cross-hatching and for doing different types of techniques with the pen, which we'll cover some today. So those are the examples I brought in, and what I'd like for you to do is grab a pen at home. Doesn't matter if you have any of these examples, that's wonderful. If you don't, that's okay too. But we're going to start out today by doing a little bit of an exercise together, because I want you to get comfortable with how exactly do you make lines with a pen when you're drawing, right? What are some of the options that you have? So the first thing I would love for you to do, and also let me say this before we start. If you follow along at home and you would like to send us some examples of your work, we'd love to share it here on the show. You can send every one of those to piketv99@gmail. Include your name, include maybe a little bit about yourself if you're a student. However much information you want to share is great, but we'd love to see your work. Even if it's something you haven't done while following me, maybe you just want to show folks some of your own pieces of art. Send them in, we'll showcase them here. So let's get started again, back to today's technique. So the first thing I want you to do is get a piece of paper out, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and you're going to make squares on here. Okay, so we'll start out with one there. I'll drop down. Doesn't matter, doesn't have to be perfect squares. There's two of them. We'll do another one here. So what we're going to be doing, we are going to be filling up these squares with lines. Depending on what effect you're shooting for with a drawing, you have options of making different lines with your pen, okay? So there's different techniques for this, and this is a good way. I do this with my art students all the time. They do this so many times that they're probably really bored of it, and if you're one of my students, I apologize ahead of time for watching it home, but let's start out with just breaking it down pretty simple. So in the first box, I want you to make a cross. So you're going to divide that into 4 sections, okay? Inside of this box, I'd like for you to make a series of lines. The first series of lines I want you to do are just straight lines. Try to make them parallel. Make them about the same distance apart. And stop. Now this is hatching. So what we're doing is we're making a series of lines that when they build up upon themselves, they start to show depth or shadow or curvatures or weight, and all those terms we use in art really just to say, make it look cool, right? The next thing I want you to do in this one, I want you to make a series of straight lines again. Now, once you've done that, go the opposite direction. You're making like a checkerboard pattern, okay? Now what we just did is called cross-hatching. So you have hatching and cross-hatching. This technique with hatching gives you just about everything you need to worry about when it comes to including shadow. But what happens though when we start to bend these lines a little bit? Maybe they're not so parallel, right? We're going to look at that in a second. But first, let's go the opposite direction this time. Let's go from this left side down to the right side, like that. Now, let's go the opposite direction. So as you can see, you can twist these lines around, move them around, do different things with them to get different effects. In this last one here, we're going to include one more line. So for this one, I'm going to start at the bottom and just go up like we have been. Okay, now for here, go the opposite direction again. Something a little different this time. We're going to go side to side on top of that. Now, as you probably are imagining, this could go on and on. We could keep on adding lines one after the other, and eventually what starts to happen is this starts to look more full, almost like it's a solid color, but it's not. Now, with line making, you also have different options to you, such as making curves. Now this is, I'm just making a series of curves, right? Once you've established that first line, whatever it looks like, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to look just like mine, but make it look curvy like that. Once you've done that, I'm going to challenge you now to follow the exact shape of the first line you drew over and over and over. Now what starts to happen is, as you go out further, you're going to notice that less details being represented in the line. Okay? See how they're getting a little bit further apart here? Now we'll go back this way. So the closer you are to that original line, the more it's going to resemble it. The further away you get, the less that resembles the first line that you made. Now, this is also a form of hatching, so we could actually continue this in a different way and go back, go forth. But notice how this almost looks like movement here, right? It almost looks like what if you threw a pebble in the water started to spread outward from there. That is what we're looking for with lines. We want to see things such as movement, texture, shadowing, that sort of thing. Now, in this box here, I'm going to challenge you to start at the bottom, and you're going to make a series of curves. Now, this is almost like if you imagine if it kept on going around, it looks like a circle, right? But it's not a circle because we're cutting it off. So we're going to continue with this. Continue on out. Keep that bend going. Don't let your line become a straight line. Keep the bend as many times as it takes to get to the other side. There we go. Again, this almost seems like movement, right? Something spreading out. For these bottom squares, let's look a little bit about texture. Now with texture, it's a little different. I would like for you in your head to imagine a stone path that you're walking on. So if there's stones on the ground, so there's one shape I've made, that's one line. If there's stones that's making up a path, there's a good chance they're going to be layered in here in a way where there is a separation between one stone and the next. You don't have to draw yours exactly like mine, but the main point here though is to make shapes leaving a border around each one. Don't let them touch. There we go. That one touched a little. But now we have all these shapes. If we go back in with our pen and we were to, let's say, color this in here, real dark, all around it, you're going to get the effect of this being some sort of a texture. So what happens is because we're leaving the white space and we're just basically tracing around it with a pen, it gives the eye the impression that these are two separate elements, the dark part and the light part. Obviously this isn't real stones laying on the ground, but if you use your imagination a little bit, you can start to see it pop out, right? I'll go ahead and finish it out just to be complete with it. And in fact, I'll probably use this instead because this is a little faster. I'm grabbing the brush pen out. It's a little faster. There we go. Almost done. So now you at home, go ahead and try to make these shapes on your paper. You should have a total of 6 blocks. In this block here, I'm going to show you something called stoppling. Now stoppling is when you add a series of dots. So you wouldn't imagine maybe with an ink pen, you always think, well, I'm just going to make lines with it. But stoppling actually is a form of shadowing. Some people call it stippling, stoppling. But what this really is just a series of dots. Pointillism, have you ever heard of that before? It's a form of art where the artist will just create the entire painting out of different dots, points of color. Each dot will have a color to it in a lot of cases. But in our situation, we're working simply with black. Now, see what's happened here? I'm going to add a few more at the bottom so you can see it a little bit better. I'm just making a series of dots. And the more that I make in one area, the darker that area is going to appear to your eye. Keep going here. So you can see what happens now. Look how this looks almost like an explosion moving out. Or it could be a texture. Think of an orange peel. Think of looking really close at something organic or the skin even, right? So all these little dots can represent that. You could keep going with it and, fill it up if you wanted. Now the last example I'm going to give you is one we're actually going to be using quite a bit today. So, well, not a lot, but some. It's getting the texture of wood. Now think of a tree, a plank of wood. we're dealing more with bark here than the actual grades like cut wood. Okay, think of the outside of a tree. So with the outside of a tree, you're going to have lines, but these lines are going to be running up and down in comparison to the pebbles that we drew. So with the pebbles, we had a lot of lines that just sort of made random shapes, but with tree bark, it usually runs up and down throughout the tree, okay? And we're going to do exactly what we did a minute ago after we're done here. We're going to fill up that space in between these lines with shadow or ink, okay? So let's go ahead and start. I'll get my brush pen back out because it's quicker that way. There's thousands of examples on how to use the pen to make various lines to get different effects. We could keep going literally the entire show with examples on this. But for what we're doing or getting ready to do today, I think this is about all we need to get started. We're going to just try to use these elements, some of them, not all of them probably, some more than others, and we're going to be creating an ink drawing of nature, of things, of scenes from what you'll find around you. This time of year, like I said, as spring is coming into full effect, and it's already here actually, but you know, it takes a while for the trees and flowers and grass to get caught up to the official start of spring as a date, right? Like today's the official start of spring. Well, you know, the trees and the the trees and flowers and such, they don't really follow our schedule so much. So we might have to wait a bit before we actually start seeing some of it. But God willing, it's coming anyway. It's on its way here, and I'm happy for it. So winter can get a little gloomy. So I know some folks really look forward to this time of year. Now, the one thing I don't look forward to this time of year, to be quite honest with everyone, is grass cutting. I do a little bit of that at home and stuff, and well, quite a bit really. And yeah, anyway, I'll be quiet about that. But as you can see now, we've made these shapes that are pretty much all running vertical, and we filled in that space. So now look at all these boxes in comparison one to the next. Each one of them is lines drawn by a pen, but at the same time, there's a variation in what we've done, getting different effects. So let's keep that in mind, and let's move on to our next example, okay? Now for this, what I'd like to do is I want to start out by having each one of us draw different types of examples from nature, okay? We're going to start out by drawing first a tree. Okay, not a whole tree. I'm going to do the base of it, of the tree, the trunk of the tree. And we're going to draw a series of these on here. We're not going to make squares, so just anywhere on your paper, pick a place and start drawing. But leave some room though. So draw about the same size I'm drawing mine in. I would draw yours the same size as well. Okay. So up here at the top, let's actually start over here. All right. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to draw a line coming down and out, just like that. So it comes down straight and then goes over to the left. We're going to come onto the right side here now, and we're going to bring this line coming down, stopping, and out. So these two lines that we've made represent nothing. If I hadn't told you we're drawing something from nature or a trunk of a tree, you'd probably say, well, that could be anything. That could be a road, this could be a sidewalk, here's a street. I mean, but now by adding these different effects that we've talked about, we start to see something a little different happen to what we're drawing. So let's start out by doing that. Over here on the side, I want you to make a series of lines, those little tiny vertical lines, like the first box we made, the parallel lines. Remember, we did the example of lines that are straight up and down. Now the key to this though is you remember you have to follow the direction of your first line you made, just like we did with our examples. So this first line curved and went up. So that means as I'm making these little parallel lines coming down through here, much smaller, they bend as well. Okay? So they don't come to the bottom down here and they're still straight like this. Okay? They bend, see, they come down and in. Now we're going to do a little bit on this side, but not as many. So watch what I'm doing here. I'm making smaller dashes. All right, great. Now what we can start doing is putting a little more detail in there. So I'm going to come back in again, and I'm going to add some more parallel lines coming down. The idea or the goal here is to have the left side appear darker than the right side, okay? Now, as you get closer to the middle of your tree, you're going to start making these lines a little thinner and a little more far apart than one or the other. So watch this, what I mean. A little thinner, a little further apart. You can see how it starts to create the effect here just by making simple lines of a tree. Now this is all fine and well, but let's add more to it. What about the ground, okay? Now, just like we did a minute ago, you're going to make a series of lines coming out. Now we're starting to do a little cross-hatching here, if you notice, because as you bring these lines up into the other section, you're drawing over top of the lines you made originally. Now, notice though that I didn't go all the way up here. I made some cross-hatching that comes up to the base of the tree and kind of stops there. See that? So let's do a little more. Now the more lines you make, the darker it's going to represent. It's going to be, it's going to look pretty dark by the time you're done. But then what happens is when you start moving over this way, I want to make smaller lines, just like I did with the tree. And it almost seems now like this tree is actually setting in the ground, right? It's not just floating lines out there in the middle of nowhere. I talked a lot about the beginning of the show about, the importance of different pens, and the reason that I think it's important if you like art and want to get involved in pen and ink drawing, to have a range of pens, such as a brush pen, felt pens, and even these smaller fine point pens. It doesn't have to be a Pilot Falcon pen, but use something small, the tip small, because what happens is you can go in and you can start to add a series of lines that are much thinner than those original lines that you made. You can probably barely see these at home, but this really adds to the effect that I'm wanting to get here. These little tiny lines, especially down here, maybe on this side of the tree. Just going to make a few parallel lines here. You can barely see these, but if you could see this up close, it would start to give the effect that there's being texture to this, almost like grass or maybe leaves have fallen down from the tree. You can continue to go as much as you wanted with this. You could even really darken this in with broad lines and get the effect all around. But we're going to move on now, though, to our next example, okay? Let's think about rocks. We see a lot of rocks around eastern Kentucky, especially on the sides of the road. Cut-through projects and different projects where the road's been removed. You see very interesting, if you just notice, I encourage you to pay attention maybe to the different shapes and different types of formations that occur. Look what, in your eye, think about as you look at something, how would I draw that, right? How could I draw that? Well, we're going to draw a rock together, a simple rock here for our next example, so maybe this will help. Maybe if you're not into art and you look at something and be like, how could I draw? Well, this might give you a framework to maybe start doing that by, okay? So what I'm going to do is going to start out first. I need a line to help show me the shape of the rock. So right beside of my tree right here, I'm going to draw a jagged shape. So this is like a big boulder, okay? There we go. Now once I have that, if you want to, you can go ahead and do this too. You can bring it down like this. Just be sure to bring this line in too. So you have a shape that looks something like this. It doesn't have to be exactly like mine. Now how in the world do we make this look like a rock? So the first thing we need to probably decide is, well, where's the light coming from? Because I want to add shadow to it. So to figure that out, I'm going to pretend that the light's coming this direction. Okay? So the light is above it to the right just a little bit. With that in mind, thinking about our techniques, let's start to add some shadow to this rock. So I'm actually going to get my brush pen for this, only because it'll take less time to fill this up. But I'm going to start over here, making a series of lines again. Now with this one, we're going to actually use a little bit of cross-hatching, almost, and stoppling too. The first one we used a little bit of cross-hatching, but this will be quite a bit more. This side of the rock is going to be very dark. So I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to just completely darken this in. It'll take a little bit of time depending on the pen you have, but for sake of time of the show, I'm going to use this brush pen to really get the effect to come out, okay? Now notice there what's happened. You started out with a series of parallel lines, small, that's come out to a point. Then again with this one, a little bit bigger this time. And then the third is darker and much larger and comes out a little bit further. But look at the separation between these lines. I'm talking about the white part of the paper here and here. Leaving just a little bit of space gives the eye the effect that this is a light source hitting this. Reflection, shadow, so on, right? So let's continue this with that in mind. Leaving a little bit of white is good. So let's keep on going. Here in the front, around the side. Now see what I'm doing? I'm making broad, thick lines, and then as I come towards the top of the rock, I'm making a little less lines, coming down with my pressure a little bit. Now, I've encountered a part of the drawing here that is really beneficial to us by showing light with this little dash that's come down and in. I don't know if you can see that real well, but right there, it almost looks like a point's being made. Now, that's great because what that tells me is there's a portion here that can be darkened in where I can leave a little bit of light showing. Like that, see? So just pay attention to where your shapes are and your shape overall, of course, and then inside of that, look at opportunities like this to use what you've drawn in a way to make it a little more realistic. Now, for cross-hatching, I'm going to jump back over to my felt pen. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to make a series of lines that's coming in towards the middle like that. A little bit up here, not a lot. And then down here, of course, we've already got a bunch of parallel lines, but we're going to go the opposite way. Coming up this time. Like that. And then, of course, here. Like that, okay? You can now leave this area that's white is a great opportunity for us to use stoppling. So I'm going to go back in now with dots, and I'm not going to cover the whole surface. I'm only going to focus on a few areas here because leaving paper showing through is a good thing. It can, like I said, really enhance the drawing, make it look more as if there's shadow being cast or reflection of light in certain areas, okay? It's a lot of dots. Now the rock is starting to look a little more like a rock, but let's put it on something. So around the rock here we're going to have the ground, and for that, this is where you're going to make those series of lines. Remember when we did the bark of a tree like this, and then we had a separation. We did this earlier, right? We also did it with the stones. So we had a stone here, and then inside of this, remember how we darkened all that in? We're going to do something like that here. So look what I'm doing. I'm drawing shapes coming out from the rock. They're very small. They're very small shapes. They're not humongous. They're not touching each other though. They're just coming out and stopping. And then over here on this side as well. Notice how far out I'm going from the rock. I'm not going real far. Like that, okay? Now take your take your pen, go back over it, try to shadow in, color in everything between the shapes you made. Okay, like this. What's going to start happening is your eye is going to start seeing the separation of dark to light, and it's going to start to, in your mind, see texture. Like maybe there's leaves there, there's definitely the soils there. I'm not coloring this side in as much. I'm just putting a little bit of ink towards the base of the rock here. There we go. So there we go. We have a rock now. We have a tree, we have a rock, we use stoppling, hatching, cross hatching. Let's move on to another example before we actually create the entire piece here, okay? For this one we're going to do let's do a scene looking out at a lake, okay? So for this, what you're going to do is you're going to start out straight line. It's called your horizon line. Imagine if you're standing on a beach somewhere or you're looking out at a really big lake. This will be the furthest your eye can see going out into any direction, okay? Or this could also be like a cornfield, big farm, like you think of something down in Tennessee or out west or something, okay? Now up top here, I'm going to draw a series of these shapes. It's going to end up being clouds, okay? I'm going to do it on that side, some here, a little bit here. Okay. Now, I'm going to change this from a lake to a large field. The reason I want to do that is I'm going to put off in the distance here maybe a row of trees or a small hill, okay? And then you can go back in and darken that in really good. The shape I just made sitting on top of the horizon line, I'm going to really add some shading to it here. There we go. Okay, now we have about what we need to start playing around with different types of shadowing. So I'm going to start at the base and I'm coming in with parallel lines, and they're getting further and further away from each other. Each series of lines are. And they're getting smaller as they get closer to me. I don't know if you can see that really well or not. So as it gets closer to me, the person or the viewer or whatever it might be, these lines are getting smaller and smaller. There's not so many here in the middle. We have more features on the left and right side. But I'm going to keep going. Now these are quick sketches I'm doing, very quick, but I do want to use these as examples because it gives you an idea of how these lines work together. Now, I'm going to go back over again, a little bit of cross hatching. I would say out of all the stuff that we talked about, obviously hatching and cross hatching and hatching are the two things you'll probably use the most when it comes to pen and ink drawings. They're just super resourceful techniques, and you can use them in just about anything, okay? Now, obviously the sun is out here somewhere, so I want you to come in here between these big shapes you drew, and you're going to make some very, very carefully placed parallel lines. Watch what happens when I do this. Notice what I'm doing. I'm going to go into the middle of the drawing. I'm going to stop. I'm not going all the way across, okay? Now watch this what happens here. I'm going to actually get closer to the end of this line. There we go. So you see what I've done? As I got down here, this shape that I first did, as I started up here, there are pretty wide lines, and as it gets closer down here to the end, it thins out, right? I'm going to add a few more up here. There we go. Now I'm going to jump over to this side, and I'm going to start drawing by doing this. I'm going to come as close, pretty close to the start of that one. I'm going to bring it in towards the other side. Now, the idea here, before I continue, the idea here is this line what if it continued all the way across, okay? But you took white paint and you put a big glob down on it to separate the line into two sections. So that means, what that means is you're going to try your best to follow this line you made, okay? You're going to continue it on this side, connecting to the other shape we made. I hope that makes sense. It's not one continuous line because it's broken up here in the middle, but it would be if we would just keep drawing it straight. Now here I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to actually start getting a little bit longer. And then bring it back in close again. All right, and then maybe over here extend these out just a little bit further. There we go. Now what has happened here, just by adding a series of these lines without connecting them, gives the eye the effect of there being a light being cast out from this area, right? And this really helps it at the bottom because having that dark shadow says to the eye, there's something behind here that's very bright. Okay? All right, good job. We're moving along pretty well. I think now after our examples and trying out and loosening up our hand a little bit, we're going to actually draw a quick sketch together of a little walkway. Okay? So bear with me. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to take your pen, place it about right in the middle of the page. You're going to draw a line coming back and stopping like that. All right? Now, you're going to draw a parallel line next to it, but watch what happens with this one. It does a little something funny at the end. It gets a little wider. See? Okay, now we're going to jump down here, and we're going to draw another line coming in towards us. Start at the same place that you drew the first line, like that. And then we're going to draw a series of parallel lines ever so often, but you have to pay attention real close here because as it gets closer to us, the width between these lines are changing, okay? They're actually getting further apart. All right, now, at the bottom, let's put a line coming down and connecting down here, like that. So now we have rails, and our walkway can keep going around this bend here like that, but we're going to bring it back to us so we can add some art to it. So let's bring it around. Watch what happens here. It comes in closer to us now, right? Now on this side of the walkway, we can have a small line that follows this one, getting a little bit wider as it gets towards us. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add a few lines going across here ever so often, okay? Now as you go further down the drawing, you're going to make these things closer together to the point where you really can't tell where one starts and one ends. It just looks like a series of lines. See? Same thing on this side. I'm going to actually put a really dark shadow just underneath that top rail right here. Darken that in real good. So what we're doing, we are creating all the elements that we're going to be shadowing in. Okay? So all these things that we're working on here is all the elements that's going to require us to add a little shadow in a minute. There we go. Now, over here on the side, well actually in the middle, coming out, you're going to bring a line. It comes out like this and stops. We don't want to add one over here though. I'll explain why in just a second. We're going to be adding some shapes. Think of what we did earlier when I drew the rock. This isn't rocks, but this is actually going to be a series of bushes. Okay? You can draw your shapes however you want to draw them, but it fills up this whole area here, right? Underneath the rails, you can see a little bit of this, so be sure and add that in there. Imagine if you could see behind it, so it continues through. We're going to have a whole lot of shadowing going on underneath here. So we're going to have a series of lines coming out. Some parallel lines like this. All parallel lines. Remember, hatching is a great technique, but it's a little more complex than just making a bunch of straight lines. Okay, it determines, you have to think about the width of these lines. You have to think about how you place them. They all don't go up and down. You basically remember as principle, the rule, fact is to follow the shape, the first original shape you made. Follow that pattern, okay? Inside the trees, remember how we did with the rocks? We added a series of parallel lines and then we stop. Series of parallel lines, stop. You're going to do that multiple times throughout these different little bushes here. Okay, you can add really wide ones and make them short. Play around a little bit with the width you make these lines. And yours is going to be different than mine. I understand. And if you're drawing at home right now and you're saying to yourself, this doesn't look quite like his, that's the goal, really. The goal is for you to do your own take on what we're doing. It isn't to really copy what I'm doing, but you do your version of it. If you do that, then we're in a good spot. That's our goal. A couple more lines here, and underneath here as well. Now you might be saying to yourself, "Yeah, pen and ink's okay. I like pen and ink. It's fun, but what about this medium, or what about this technique?" Well, I almost guarantee you that we have a video covering about most of that in the archives. We've done over 100 episodes of the Art Workshop. So if you ever take an inkling, you can go to the YouTube channel. I highly recommend it. Pike TV is an amazing resource here locally. We for information, public service, and things of that nature, and the Art Workshop. You can check it out by going to YouTube, but you have to search for Pike TV 99. Include that 99 in there. And what that's going to happen then after that, you're going to be taken to the YouTube channel. I highly encourage you to please subscribe to the channel so you're updated to when new stuff's released. And also, you can check out the entire playlist of the Art Workshop, over 100 episodes. We deal with paint, watercolor, acrylic, there's airbrushing, there's everything in the world. We do with anime, manga, comics, portrait, landscapes. We've done, I don't even remember all the stuff we've done. We've been so much. Now, as I've been rambling, I drew another bush over here, but I forgot at the bottom, I'm going to add this a little darker down at the bottom like that. So see what happens? Just adding a simple little addition of color or of ink will totally change the way it's seen. Now, we have this path going off in the distance. We have a few bushes over here. In the main back right here, connecting this element and this element, we need to add something along the line here. We're going to have a tree that comes up first. We need to make sure and have that in there. So we get this little tree, it pops up right here. So now that we got that, let's go back in here now, and we're going to add a shape that goes all the way across our drawing. Now look at this, what I'm doing. I'm going up and down and making these little tiny curvature lines, these little, almost like cloud shapes. They're not. It's supposed to be a cloud. It goes all the way across the back of the drawing, right? And what you do from there is you're going to start at the bottom, and just like you did with over here with the bushes and what you did with the rock, you're going to make a series of these parallel lines, and they're going to come up from the bottom. Some of them touch, some of them don't. But just be sure, if you just make sure and make the bottom of this darker than what you're doing at the top, you'll get the effect that we're hoping to get here. And the effect we're hoping to get is of obviously light source. Where does the light hit? How does it react to what you're drawing? A little bit more to go here. So hopefully at the end of this episode, if you followed along at home, the next time you're out, you're looking around at nature a little bit, and I ask you to remember to think about, if you see something, how would I draw that? Now you can try, right? You can take these elements and just go for it. I highly suggest you don't use a pencil. just get a pen, look at something that you are interested in, or in whatever it might be, but try to draw it just as it is without erasing, without trying to go back and change things, right? Now, up here towards the top, I've left this off purposely. We're going to bring pretty good sized tree here. Now, remember how we did that at the bottom of the tree earlier? We did these little series of lines, but this is in reverse now, though, right? Because, let me show you if I can find it. This first example, all the shadow was on the left side, right? So that means the light was coming in this direction. Okay, we're flipping that around for this. The light's coming in this way this time. So if that's the case, all you have to worry about really is making the backside darker. Okay, so and I'm not going to do the whole tree. I'm just going to kind of get a baseline here for we can work with. We do a little cross hatching at the bottom. Remember, the lines on the right side are a little thinner, further apart, not as many. Something like that. See what happens? So just by adding these two shapes here brings so much to the work. I want to fill out this tree. Now, this tree hasn't bloomed out all the way yet. It's still working on it. We'll add a few leaves trying to pop out. So maybe a little bit of leaves here, maybe a few here. And all I'm doing is making that same shape that I've played around with from the beginning. It looks like a cloud, but depending on how you add to it will give a different effect, okay? We use a little bit of stoppling here, tapping it, a little bit of color at the bottom of these shapes. There we go. And then the tree itself, as it goes up, let's grab our finer tip. That's our brush pen. It's kind of hard to see that. So with the brush pen, the cool thing about it, just another side note here, you can get a variation of lines with this thing based on how much pressure you put down. So you notice how that first line's super thick and then it gets a little thinner? That's a good point to using a brush pen, is that you don't have to buy 5 or 6 different felt pens with different size tips on it. You can basically get the same effect with a brush pen just depending on your pressure. Now the last thing I want to do to this, and we could keep going. We could add more shapes out here in the distance and maybe really darken those in more like this. Think about the little example that we did earlier where we drew the field and the sun was in the background. Remember how that shape had to be darkened in at the bottom very intensely, right? We put a lot of shadow in there. So this one's going to require that too. Something like that, okay? We're almost done, except for we're going to add shadow and a little texture to the ground. Texture is important when it comes to trying to draw something as you see it. Let's put a little shadow coming across the walk here, just by a series of lines, parallel lines. Watch how I make them a little bit wider here. Okay, let's do that again up here. This time I'm going to make a series of lines, parallel lines, but they're going to be what? They're going to be, every one of them, horizontal. They're going to cast over top of the walkway, over top of the grass, here, back towards the tree. Watch how I thin them out. So as it gets further towards the middle of the drawing, I'm making smaller lines, less pressure with the pen. Now you may have a lot of shadow in here, but so you could go over it again, making the same series of lines, but pushing down a little bit harder. You can make them really dark here around the base of the tree. So what these lines are supposed to represent is the shadow casting from up here top, right, the top of that tree, the canopy of the tree. This is the canopy being cast onto the sidewalk. Let's add a little bit of texture to our grass and a little bit of texture to the sidewalk. I'm going to grab this other nib pen that I brought in. What I'm going to do for that is all around the edges here, all around this line, that edge of the walkway, I'm going to use Stoppling, and I'm going to make a series of lines, but be careful because you want it to be really dark close to that original line. See what I mean? Then as you come out towards the middle of the walkway, separate those points more. They're not so close together. Keep going. You could really work this too. You could continue to do it so that it really darkens it in, but we have to always be conscientious. I can't say the word. We have to be aware of time here on the show. So I don't want to run over too much. So conscientious, that's it. All right, a little bit of shadow here. Conscientious. All right, and also let's go doing some Stoppling here around the edge of the berm of the walkway, like that. Okay, there we go. Like I said, though, I could sit here and work on this drawing all day long, but at some point we have to stop the show because of time. But if you've enjoyed this time together, I hope you have. Be sure and let us know. Like I said, if you've drawn along with us today and you want to show us your work, we would love to see it. Because this show is certainly not about me. It's not about any of the materials really, brand-wise or any of that stuff. This show's for you. We put this show together for you. And when we get feedback, it encourages us to keep going. It lets us know that you're having fun and participating. And it's what I like to call value for value, okay? So if you found this show any value to it at all, you can add value to it too. You could actually contribute and make the show even better by sending us examples of your work. And here it is. This is how you do it. One last time. Send it to piketv99@gmail.com, okay? All right. We've almost got it. piketv99@gmail.com. Please include your name, maybe your age. Like I said, if you're a student, we'd love to, as much or less information you want, but we'd love to see your work. Well, there we go. It's a nice little walkway heading off into springtime. You can, if you want to put a little bit of grass in here. I hate grass so much. It's growing. I told you earlier I have to cut it a lot. So I was really hesitant about drawing grass. But I guess I should add a little bit. These are just little straight lines. Now watch, don't keep going this way with it. Make it smaller and smaller as you get out towards the middle, okay? Further apart, smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But as you're getting closer to yourself here, you can put a few more larger blades of grass, like that. Put a few big ones here by the tree, why not? I'm gonna have to cut it anyway, aren't I? Doesn't matter, it's coming. There we go, yes. All right. I hope you've enjoyed, always sign your work. I hope you've enjoyed the show today, I really do. We really appreciate you, like I've said. If you have time and would like to check out more, be sure and go to the YouTube channel, PikeTV99. In that's a playlist called The Art Workshop. Click on it, over 100 videos, episodes available for you to look at. Wow, that was fun. I love pen and ink drawings. That's my favorite medium to use. So this has been fun for me. Notice no pencils today. We did everything pen on paper, no erasing, straight through it. We have to be brave and confident. We can do it, and that's what we did. So I'm glad you followed along. I so dearly appreciate each one of you watching the show and giving us feedback. It means so much. It's a joy to be able to do this. I'm going to continue as long as God lets me, and I hope you'll tune in when I do, okay? So, again, try this at home. Springtime's here. Get out, draw something. You don't have to have a lot of cool materials. Pen and ink, pencil and paper, you're good. Eraser too, but if you're going to go that route. Anyway, I'll stop rambling for today. That was fun. I really appreciate you tuning in. On behalf of Pike TV and all the producers here, we want to say thank you. And remember, as I always say, keep drawing.